Good morning, class. Today we'll be learning about the chapter Conservation of Plants and Animals from your curriculum, right? So in this chapter, we would be, so if you remember from class 7th, right? The chapter Forests Are Lifeline, right? Where Professor Ahmed, Paheli, Bujo and Tibu, they visit a forest. And throughout their visit and journey inside the forest, they learn various aspects about forest, how forests are important, the importance of forest and the various aspects of forest. For example, the forest have three important functions, right? The first function is productive function. That forests are a part of, of our economy, and they provide us with products like timber, pulp, wood pulp from which we manufacture paper, herbal medicines and many other things, right? Cashew, raisins, many other things we obtain from the forest, right? So that's productive. The second is regulative. Forests are regulating cycles like the carbon cycle. You know that the plants, they take in carbon dioxide, they give out oxygen. They also take part in the oxygen cycle because they do respire and do photosynthesis. They also are the part of the giant water cycle where they transpire and add water to the atmosphere. So they have a lot of regulative function. So along with being productive, they also have regulative functions where they try to regulate the climate of a region. So the third aspect is protective. So protective would mean that they provide refuge for animals, right? So there are many animals, you know, that the producers, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, which live inside the forest, and they provide refuge to these animals. So this is protective. So there are three major functions that you learned last year: the regulative function, the productive function and the protective function, right? So that's what we would be extending our syllabus, and we would be learning about how do we conserve these things because they are so important. Why and how should we conserve them? So your chapter, so what's the speciality about our planet? What is so special about our planet? Yeah.
There are life forms present in it.
Okay, very good. There is life available on the planet. As far as whatever we know, it's the only planet that has life, and that's why it's very important.
Probably also because in water there is life.
Yeah, there is water. So because of the presence of water, which we are not able to find anywhere else, there are probes which are sent in the space, but as of now we know that the availability of water on our planet, and that makes life possible, right? So availability of water, availability of life form makes our planet very, very special. And that's why it's important to understand that the planet that we live on is almost like a living creature. It breathes in and out. It breathes in gases and release out gases. There are giant biogeochemical cycles which are happening. They create structures like mountains. They destroy structure. So over the period of time, it's a very dynamic place. You know, there are wind currents, there are ocean currents, there are the climate, the seasons, everything. It's quite dynamic. And all the organisms which are living here, they have to adapt to this dynamism of the planet. And that's what makes this whole planet so special and great. So, as he said, that life is very important. What is the term that we use for explaining the various forms of life? The term is biodiversity. So the immense richness of life that you see on the planet, that includes the plants, that includes the animals, that includes all the microorganisms like the protozoans, like the fungi, like the bacteria, all of these organisms, all sorts of diversity of life, organisms, they together, the term that we can use is biodiversity. We can say biodiversity in general, the whole biodiversity of the planet, or we can specifically use the word like biodiversity of Delhi, or biodiversity of Himalayas, or biodiversity of India. So it could be used in a it could be used as a relative term, depending upon the geographical space that you are trying to talk about. But if I say biodiversity, that means in that area, all the plants, all the animals, and all sorts of organisms which are present. Okay, so this biodiversity has a lot of ecological function and role, and that's why we need to conserve it, right? Because what is conservation for you? You've heard about this term conservation. What does conservation mean? Yeah. Protecting what?
The careful and sensible use of resources.
Careful of sensible use of resources. So she is saying that biodiversity is a resource and we should try to conserve it. We should try to conserve means what? It sustains for a long time. It stays there. We are providing them conditions so that they are able to thrive in, right? So we have to plan, because now we are into a soup. We and animals share a common space, right? Whatever space that we have, whatever geographical space we have, animals also have their right to this space, and we also have it. But because we are too dominant, we are exploring these areas for resources, and we're using the land and building up our things. But the animals, we are not thinking about them. So it's very important. There has to be an end. We need to think about how there has to be a border. Okay, at least after this we should not be doing any sorts of activities which would destroy forests and their habitats. So it's very important to plan these things. How are we going to make some pockets within the planet which will conserve plants and animals and let them be like the way they are, right? So this is what we are going to learn in this chapter: conservation. How do we conserve the different forms of organisms which are present? Okay, the chapter looks like this. The first page, conservation of plants and animals in your book. So in totality, we would be dividing the chapter into three major parts. The first part would be how and why forest and its wildlife are under threat. What is it that is making us having this chapter in your curriculum? Why are we learning about this? Why are we, what are the threats? So the second is, what would happen? What would be the consequences if in case we do not plan anything, we just go on the way we want, and we do not conserve any of these green pockets or green areas and conserve biodiversity? What would be the effect? Are we going to get something back? Would it be having an effect on our lives later on? What kind of problems we might be facing? How are we disturbing the whole ecology? All that we'll be learning about in this chapter. And the third is, how are we going to conserve it? Right? How are we going to conserve? What are the plans we have? Right? So these are the three important aspects of this chapter. So you might have heard of terms like national park, wildlife sanctuary, and biosphere reserve. Has anyone been to any of these?
I have been to wildlife sanctuary. It had specific timings to when we can visit the animals.
Mm-hmm.
And permission we have to do.
You visited which one?
The National Park.
Okay. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Yeah. Ranthambore National Park, right? So Ranthambore National Park is one of the national parks, top 10 national parks in India, right? Anybody else has been to a national park? Jim Corbett National Park. In fact, that's the first national park ever in India, right? Anybody else has been to a biosphere reserve or something? Kaziranga National Park. Okay. So you've been to forest, you know the landscape. You have an image about how a forest looks like and how a reserve forest looks like. You have a picture image inside your mind, right? So you have a mental image about it. So I think we would try to refine it. We try to understand how they work, how would they operate. When you go there, you just visit things, but how do they operate? What are the planning behind this? We would try to learn about these things. So these are the ways by which we conserve wildlife. We can conserve it by building up national parks, by building up wildlife sanctuaries, and building up biosphere reserve. There's a lot of difference amongst these terms, and we'll try to find out the differences amongst all the three. Okay, why do we need to have protected areas or reserve forest?
The plants and animals can live there peacefully when we go there for.
Okay, we need to have, he wants to say that we need to conserve plants and animals so that they survive, so that in future generations can see those animals, right? We should not be, there are many animals which are endangered and we need to conserve them. They should be there for a long time for your next generation to see that, right? Yeah.
Sir, we need to save forests and wildlife so that we can maintain the balance of nature.
Okay, the balance of nature, very important point. We need to conserve animals, the food chains, the environment and everything, because they are a part of this system, and we need to maintain this system, balance of nature. Very important, very good. Yes, to conserve different forms of life that exist on the planet, right? These lives are very important. Every year there are so many species which are extincting, which are going away from the planet. If a species goes off from the planet, we cannot create it back. We have not created it. It's a natural process of their creation. So if they are gone from the planet, they are gone. So we need to conserve them, right? And they are a part of this system, and the balance of nature is a very important term, right? Okay, so we need to conserve forests for that. Okay, now have a look at these pictures. All right, before that, so Why do we need to conserve it? Because there is a biodiversity crisis at the moment, right? 20% of the world's biodiversity is going to get lost in next 30 years, 20%, right? And what scientists, computer models predict is that by the end of this century, 50% of the plants and animals that you see, the various forms of life that you see, will be off from this planet. So there is a big biodiversity crisis which is at stake. Second is 50,000 out of 250,000 plant species may get extinct in future, 4,000 out of 20,000 butterflies, 2,000 out of 9,000 bird species in next 30 years. And there are so many species that we have not yet discovered. They are in the wild, in the deep sea, in the dense forest. They have or new species which have evolved. We have no idea about them. So there are so many eukaryotic organisms, about 15% we don't even get to know, and they come on the planet and they go, right? So all of this is very important. That's the crisis that we are talking about. That's why we are talking about conservation in this chapter. Okay, and if you look at the map of India, you'll find that India has a unique place when it comes to biogeographical relief. You'd find that there are so many relief forms that you see. We have the youngest mountains, we've got the oldest plateaus, we've got the oldest mountains, we've got the desert, we've got the lagoons and the estuaries and the Bay of Bengal and the marine environment and rainforest, all of these things. And that's why the biodiversity of India is great and huge. And it's our responsibility as citizens of India to conserve this. And that's why there's so many areas in India that are they are classified into national parks and biosphere reserves. So you can see on the top we have the Great Himalayas, where we have some of these sites. We have some of these national parks and protected areas, even in the deserts. We've got so many right in the central India. We'll talk about this in detail. There's so many tropical rainforests in the northeast and in the southwest, in the Western Ghats. And you also have the Great Nicobar, which is again a very unique ecosystem. So we've got a lot of biodiversity, and then we also have a lot of responsibility, because since we have this resource, we have to also conserve it. It's our responsibility. So, and that's why we also have some of these biosphere reserves all across India. You can see some of these on the map. Okay, so what is happening in these images? Have a close look at these images and what's happening. Okay, that girl.
Animals are coming into towns.
Very good. So here's a leopard which is into a city. Okay.
So due to the destruction of their habitat, they are forced to come out of.
Yes, because they do not have enough space to move around. They are now encroaching upon urban areas. You would regularly find in headlines that a leopard entered a city, or a leopard attacked villagers, or a tiger came out of a forest. Very frequently these things come, and it sometimes scares you, but also it's important. Why is it happening? It's happening for the same reason that I was talking about, that we have shared spaces. But if we take up too much space, that the animals are not left for themselves, then it's a big problem. You can see the elephants, they need large areas to walk around. Elephants, with their families, they move around, right? They have a lot of emotional intelligence and all that. So they always are in groups of their families, and they always walk around the forest. And they are a part of their ecology, because some of these grasses that you see in Periyar, right? There are empty spaces which are just grasses. It's because some of these seeds, they go into their bodies, in their alimentary canal, and they have to pass through the acidic thing from their alimentary canal, and then they excrete it out in the dung. Only then these seeds can break their dormancy and can grow into grasses. So they are part of ecology that we don't understand. But if they do not get those space to walk around, they have to encroach upon, and that's why these elephants regularly, they come into their tea gardens, they come into their agricultural fields. And then there's a lot of agricultural loss. And then villagers, they're after them, trying to kill them. Some of them are putting bombs in the bananas and feeding them. And these kind of incidences. So many elephants, they die on the railway tracks because they don't have any idea about it. Some of these animals, they die on the railway tracks which are passing through these wilderness areas. And so these animals are disturbed a lot. When we have highways cutting the forest into two, when we have train tracks cutting the forest, fragmenting their areas, they get very little space to move around. Of course, they would be coming into our space, and that's the big problem that we face. So the animals are homeless. That's a big emotional, should be an emotional thought inside you, that they are homeless and they do not have their own, the way they want to live. And this is because of us, and that's what we have to Here you can see they are putting fireballs onto the elephants to make them go away, and because they are getting into the villages and destroying the agricultural products, all of that. So what are the threats to biodiversity? Yeah, last by that. Deforestation, very important. One huge thing, basic, major thing, deforestation, right? So if I look at the picture here, anybody, oh yeah, more points, yeah. Increase in population. When we make more urban centers, right? We'll discuss that in details. Yeah. Desertification, conversion of our lands into desert. Habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation. Very good. So these are some of the reasons why biodiversity is under threat, right? So let's take it one by one. The first one, you see this image. What's happening? Deforestation, right? So billion dollar, trillion dollar economy is running on wood and timber, right? So it's a resource. Every country wants to earn money by selling them. There are corporate giants which need these timbers. So they keep on cutting the trees for paper that you're using, for furniture, right? For making sports items and many other things. So cutting of trees is a big problem. When you cut trees, these areas are forest areas. You say, in the beginning I said, the forests provide refuge. It's like a shelter, it's like a home. And when you cut forests, you're destroying their homes. So deforestation is one major reason that's making animals out of their homes and destroying the whole ecology. Okay. So you can see here, there is a llama here, and there's some antelopes over there. Their forest areas have been destroyed, so they do not have the natural space that they wanted to live. These ayis and lemurs, they go around, they up on the trees and they bark. They have this one middle finger. They try to knock the wood, and if there's a sound, and they try to understand if it's something inside. They drill hole and they try with the nails, and they try to take insects and eat it. So they need those plants to be there for their food. And if you cut these trees and they don't have these resources to eat and all, then of course they would not be surviving for long. And that's what deforestation is doing to them. So the deforestation is, if you want to define deforestation, what's the definition of deforestation? So cutting down of trees on the large scale, clearing the forest for any other purpose, right? That is called as deforestation, plain and simple, right? Cutting it for various reasons, and so that's deforestation. Okay. And the causes of deforestation, there are two major causes of deforestation, if you want to group them. One is called because of humans, and it's majorly this, only this part which is more important. So anthropogenic means which are coming out of human activity, right? So there are many reasons of deforestation which are due to human activity, right? We'll talk about that in a while. And there are some natural causes as well. Some natural causes like forest fires, soil erosion, yes, floods and droughts, landslides. So some of these reasons, yeah. Huh? Overgrazing would be, yeah, of course you can say that. So all of these are natural reasons why forests are being destroyed, and this is natural cause of deforestation. And the anthropogenic means deforestation which is caused due to human activity. Okay. So if I try to list it down, there is rapid urbanization. You use wood for fuel. You procure land for agriculture. You use wood for paper industry and timber and furniture. So let's take first one, rapid urbanization. Urbanization is one major reason. First thing is that whenever the population rises, when you have more people, every time there are more people coming to the planet, into a space. So when there are more people, you need more land area for their homes, more land area for what they consume, right? It's not just the child is born and you need space for that person. For that person, you need land for the food that person will eat. The urban centers, the recreational areas, the commercial areas, the transportation, the factories which are manufacturing goods. So whenever there is population rise, you have to expand cities. The current example is Delhi, right? So if you see around Delhi, there were satellite small cities like Noida, Greater Noida, Gurgaon, Faridabad, right? All these cities are now becoming too much, and all these, they were forest land earlier, but they all are now getting converted into urban centers. That means whenever cities expand, whenever population rises, cities expand, that means we have to have more land. And what do? we try to convert agricultural lands into urban areas, but we also need food. We can't compromise on food. So what happens? We also need more land for agriculture. Where do we get the more land from agriculture? By cutting down the forest. It's a vicious cycle. So as more people come, as cities expand, they encroach upon agricultural land, and because we need food as well, we can't do away with food. So we have to have more land for agriculture. So we cut down and trees and we get more land into. So there is continuous deforestation that is happening, and it will be projected in future. There will be more and more deforestation. As more and more people will be there, more and more cities will expand, and there will be more of deforestation. Rapid urbanization, major reason, right? Are you able to understand this? Okay. Second, wood as a fuel. In very cold areas of our country, elsewhere in the globe, you would find that wood is still used for heating, right? In northern countries which are very cold or cold regions of the world, they burn the wood to create a centralized heating system for their room, right? In India also, if you go to colder areas where which are not villages which are not directly connected to the electrical grid, what do they use for heating? They use wood. Also, wood is used for making charcoal. Some in very poor areas of our country, you also still use it for cooking food, right? So wood is always being there for, and is it's still being used as a source of fuel because it can burn. Also for cremation, we use wood for cremation of dead bodies, right? Okay. Now, if this picture, what is happening? Yeah. Yes, they are doing step farming here. This must have been a green area, green forest, dense. You see how dense it is. How dense it is. Thousands of plants must have been cut to get this land for agriculture. So whenever we do agriculture, what do? We clear off forest areas. And when we clear off forest areas, this is huge, because agricultural land, we need a lot of land for agriculture because there's too much of people to feed. We need to have every year set amount of yield of agricultural goods, and they have to increase every year. So what do? This is what is happening. So when we do agriculture, for agricultural land, we are cutting down forests. Okay. Paper industry, that tissue paper that you write on, magazines, newspapers, all of these papers, they are coming from trees. The raw material for preparation of paper is wood pulp. So all of this, and of course it's not just the trees. When you cut trees, you are also harming the tigers, you are harming the animals which are living there, all of that. So it's not just that you cut the trees and you got the paper, okay. You have immensely influenced the environment, right? Because you've destroyed homes for animals, you have destroyed the whole ecological cycles which were running there, and all of that. Okay. Timber and furniture, all of you know that. In every household, I believe, has things which are made up of wood, right? Some of the houses in mountain regions are completely made from wood, right? So they're from building up houses, for making furniture, for making sports goods like cricket bat, hockey sticks, all of that, you need wood for that. So timber and furniture industry is also big reason for cutting down the forest and trees. Now, this one is not mentioned in the book. Mining, big thing which is missing in the book. It's mining industry. They hugely cut down vast areas of forest because forests are sitting on the wealth, mineral wealth. Beneath the forest there is coal. Beneath that forest there is aluminium. Beneath that forest there is copper. Beneath that forest there is zinc. And then these companies, they lobby the government that they want these lands because they want to earn money, they want to do business. So all huge land, there must have been forests. They are cleared to obtain these raw materials from the land. And after you use it, it's very difficult to plant and regrow trees here. So after the mine is used up, it's called a spent mine. And that spent mine, usually there's a law that after the mining is done, you have to regrow plants, you have to replant these areas. But it's very difficult because there's no fertile layer of soil, everything is damaged. So huge areas are given to these mines, and that's also causing a lot of deforestation. Okay. Natural causes, as you already have said. There was a news last week. What was the news? Yes, Amazon forest. Yeah,
Amazon forests have been burning for more than 2 weeks now. And
Yeah.
Hundreds of kilometers.
Yes.
Trees have been burned.
yeah. So this is a big news. So it's important for us to be connected to these news, and we should be knowing about it. Amazon has the greatest biodiversity on our planet. Amazon is the densest rainforest of the world, and it provides 20% of the oxygen that we breathe in. So there are no political spaces now. Oxygen is for everyone. It's not just for the Brazilians. It's for everyone, right? If I pollute here, it's going in the air. It's for everyone all over the planet. We are one connected group of people. We're Homo sapiens, right? So it's not just if the Amazon is getting burned and we should not be worried about because it's not in India. It's not that reason. If the Amazons are not there, you are also going to get influenced because they are contributing to 20% of the oxygen cycle. So if that does not happen, it's the same oxygen that everybody breathes in. It's not just the Brazilians that are breathing that oxygen. It gets circulated within the atmosphere. So it's very important. Forest fires, big reasons for burning down a forest, clearing up a forest. That's a natural process. It happens naturally also, but nowadays there have been research which suggests that forest fires have increased due to global warming, due to intensive heat periods which are happening in some of the tropical areas of the world. So forest fires, usually we'll keep it in the natural causes, but there have been research which proves that in current times, because of global warming, there have been excessive heating seasons which have led to more of these forest fires and extreme weather conditions. But of course, forest fires would always clear the forest. They would destroy habitats for various animals and plant species. Okay, extreme period of drought. Again, if you know about Sahara, the largest desert of the planet, right? Is in northern Africa. So Sahara has some really great things to teach. If you go right in the middle of Sahara, you'd find rock paintings with paintings of crocodile, swan, birds which are aquatic birds, zebras, deers, all of these things. So when you look at the paintings, you would find animals which need water. They're not dry, they are not the animals which are found in dry regions. These are animals which are found in almost like rainforest or where there is a lot of water. And then later on, satellite images also show that there is a trench of something sort of a river that crosses across the Sahara. That means Sahara was once a tropical rainforest, but over the period of time when climate changed and there was no rain for a very long time, all of that rainforest have disappeared, right, and has been converted into the desert. In fact, Sahara now is the largest desert of the planet. So extreme weather, what does it do? When there is no moisture in the soil, the plants would dry up. The trees would dry up, and over a period of time they would die and fall, and there would be no nutrients, there would be no moisture, because plants, if they want to get nutrients, they get it along with more water. So if there's no moisture in the soil, there will be no nutrients available to the plants, and the plants would start to fall apart and they will die, and this would convert the land into absolutely barren lands, which we can say that would lead to deforestation or clearing up of forests. Okay, so there are two reasons which are natural reasons, which is one is and extreme droughts. Okay, so the second part now. So where is the various consequences that we would be bearing if in case deforestation happened? What would happen if deforestation occurs, right? When deforestation happens, what would be the consequences? There are few listed down here. There would be increase in the temperature and pollution level. Of course, when there are no trees, right, we'll discuss how they would cause global warming and all. There will be increase in the level of carbon dioxide leading to global warming. The groundwater will also get lowered. That's what we are facing nowadays. Rainfall and fertility of the soil will decrease. Increased chances of natural calamities such as floods and droughts. Now, if you look at these things, they're right in the news all across, right? You talk about pollution, it's there always, it's pollution, right? Global warming, right? Groundwater, there was a water crisis issue all across India this year, right? You learned about the loss of fertility of the soil, decline in agricultural productivity, right? And you also keep on hearing about floods in various parts of our country and droughts and various others. So all of them can be linked to the term deforestation. They are basically the consequences of deforestation. Let us take one point after another. Okay, first is deforestation leading to droughts. Now there is a clear cut, there are two terms. One is deforestation that you already know, that is clearing up of the forest. The second is drought. Do you know what is drought? What is drought? Yeah.
So when the land becomes barren due to the loss of water.
Okay, when there's no water available in the soil, right, and so there could be no vegetation that we can grow, right, and if we can't grow any vegetation on that land, that would be drought. So it's kind of scarcity of water, right, that would have multiple problems in, further, but it's scarcity of water. So deforestation would result in drought, right. How? That's the question. So there are many things which we can link. First, what is deforestation? Cutting down of trees. You know that plants, what they do? They do photosynthesis. And in photosynthesis, what gas do they take inside and fix? Carbon dioxide, right? So carbon dioxide is what they take inside. That means whatever carbon dioxide is available, they are basically the sink of carbon dioxide. They absorb this carbon dioxide into them. They fix that into carbohydrates that is eaten by producers, which are eaten by consumers, right? And recycled through decomposers. So if there is deforestation, if we cut down trees, that means there would be lesser number of trees. Lesser number of trees would mean that they would take in lesser carbon dioxide. So if they can't, if I cut a tree, if I cut the forest, that forest was taking in carbon dioxide into it, was decreasing the level of carbon dioxide, was taking the carbon dioxide into them. It's a sink of forest. If I cut this, that means that carbon dioxide is not going inside the forest into the plants. It's not being fixed by the plants. So where is it? It's in the air. So you know that animals and plants, and also plants respire and animals also respire, and we return back the carbon dioxide, and this cycle keeps on like that. But we need that 0.03% of carbon dioxide so that we have 15 to 20 degree as an average temperature where we can survive. But when we cut trees, those trees which should have absorbed the carbon dioxide, that excess carbon dioxide is available in the atmosphere. And if it's available in the atmosphere, that means that excess carbon dioxide would absorb infrared radiations which are coming from the earth. So when the sun heats up the surface of the earth, in summers you can't even walk without shoes, right? It's very warm, the roads and the concrete, everything is very warm, even your head becomes, and the cars are so warm, right? So they absorb this heat. The whole surface of the earth, the water and the land, they absorb the heat and they re-radiate the heat back. So this is again infrared radiation radiated by the surface of the earth. This radiation should have gone out but gets trapped because of excess carbon dioxide. So if it's 0.03%, that's good enough, because that much is enough for making the planet stay at an average temperature about 15 to 20. That's good enough for the average temperature. That means coldest and the warmest, we do an average. So that average temperature is good enough for survival of life on earth. But if we have excess carbon dioxide, if I cut the trees, those forests which were absorbing that carbon dioxide, if I cut those forests, that means the carbon dioxide that should have been gone into the carbon cycle is now available in the atmosphere. And if it's there in the atmosphere, that means there is an excess carbon dioxide, and that excess carbon dioxide is now like 0.0, it's now 0.04 almost, right? So 0.01% extra carbon dioxide would mean more heat trapped by the carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. And if that happens, there will be global warming that you've already been learning since so long. And if there will be global warming, there would be changes in the season, there will be changes in the water cycle. And if there will be change in the water cycle, then there will be places where there will be too much of rain, but there will be many places on the planet where there will be fewer rains. And if there will be no rains or fewer rains, then that means those areas would be drought prone or will lead to droughts, we can say, right? So just to revise once again, what's happening when you're cutting down the trees? The carbon dioxide that should have been absorbed by the forest is in the atmosphere, and that means that excess carbon dioxide which is there will absorb more heat, infrared radiations, right, emitted from the surface of the earth, and then that would lead to global warming, and global warming would lead to disturbed water cycle, and that would lead to reduced rainfall that ultimately leads to droughts. So there is a link between the first thing that we talk about, deforestation, and the last thing that we talk about, drought. So how it's happening? It's through this whole process. Is it clear? Okay. The second is desertification. Again, two terms. Deforestation, you know, clearing up a forest. Desertification. You know what desertification is?
So the converting of land area into desert because of the absence of trees.
Okay. When there is no water, when the water cycle is abrupt, you can have, or the soil has lost its fertility, then no vegetation can grow on such a soil. There will be land, but the soil does not have, is not fertile enough to support vegetation. It cannot support herbs and grasses and shrubs and trees and all of these things. So if it cannot support vegetation, that land would become barren, or we can say it will become almost like a desert, right? So deforestation also has a link to desertification. Let's see how. So fewer trees, lesser number of trees, deforestation, right, would lead to what? It will expose the soil to agents like air and water. And these air and water, they would erode the topsoil. You know, the topsoil, it takes years, hundreds of years to prepare that few centimeters of layer of topsoil that supports growth of seeds and supports the growth of plants, right? And if it gets washed off in few minutes by water, by air, this would expose the lower rocky layers. You know that rock is from, the soil is from the parent rock, so that will be exposed, and that means that soil will lose fertility. And if it will not have any fertility, that means no plants can grow, and it would cause desertification, right? So that's again, deforestation is linked to desertification, right? So we learned two things now. How deforestation causes consequences of deforestation. Number one, it causes desertification, and droughts also leads to droughts. Okay. One more thing, yeah.
So what's the difference between droughts and desertification?
Drought and desertification. Desertification is a process of conversion of green areas into desert areas, right? So it's happening like that. But drought is when, of course, is one of the links. If there'll be no rains in an area, right? If there'll be no rain, there'll be no moisture. The plants cannot grow. So drought is when you don't have rains specifically. Desert is when the soil cannot support vegetation. So desertification is when the soil cannot support any vegetation, right? And why would it not support? Because it does not have moisture, you can say, but also it does not have any fertility. It does not have the nutrients that can allow plants to be able to grow, right? Yeah.
So would droughts naturally eventually lead to desertification?
Drought leading to desertification, of course, is a link. When there will be no rains, right, for a long time, obviously the vegetation will not be there. When the vegetation will not be there, the soil will be exposed. And if the soil will be exposed to air and water, there will be erosion of soil and water of the top layer of the soil, and the top layer of the soil, which is fertile, gets eroded. Then it cannot support any more vegetation, and obviously that land will not be fertile enough to support any vegetation and will get converted into a desert, right? Okay. Floods. Again, you learned in class 7 that the canopies of the trees, right, the dense forest, when it rains heavily, they slow down the rain. When they slow down the rain, it goes drip by drip onto the soil, that the soil absorbs the water and slowly fills the groundwater. But if I clear up the forest, the rain would come and flash onto the ground, erode the soil, reach the river and quickly go back to the sea. There is no time where we can hold this water. That's the problem which is happening. Why do we have floods? Because rain quickly gets to the soil, hits the surface, and it tries to move into the lower areas, which leads them to the rivers, and from rivers it goes back into the sea. Whereas forests, they'll slow down the speed of the water. They make water percolate into underground. They let this whole thing slow down so that the water can go into the underground and we can use that water for various activities. But because there are no forests, the rain, they hit the ground directly and they try to move into the lower areas, and very fast surface runoff, and that's what is causing floods. So there's also connection between deforestation and floods, right? Okay. So when you talk about conservation, there's another very important term that you should be knowing, that is biosphere, right? So biosphere is the place on earth, wherever, whatever region, the deepest part of the earth's crust, the deepest part of the ocean, in the atmosphere, wherever there is a life form, microbial life form, plant or animal life form exists. So whichever the part of the earth which has in which the life form can exist, that is called as biosphere. And the biosphere would include many different elements, and there are four. One is called the atmosphere, that has the oxygen and the carbon and the nitrogen, right? And the hydrosphere, which is the aquatic ecosystems like the marine, sea, freshwater rivers, glaciers, all these things, ponds and lakes. And lithosphere, that's the land, the different kinds of geographical relief landform that you say that includes seafloor as well. So all of them, and ecosphere, wherever the life exists. So together, all of these things, the hydrosphere, the ecosphere, the lithosphere and the atmosphere, together they form the biosphere, which supports life, right? Okay. So in this diagram you can see, in a biosphere is the portion of the earth that is inhabited by life, right? So life is inhabited here, that's biota, that means all living organism. But that all living organism is supported by the environment, right? So biota means all the biotic components, that is plants, animals and microorganisms. But these all organisms in an ecosystem in that area, right, they are supported by lithosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere, whichever is surrounding them. So that's how a biosphere supports life, right? So if you look here, hydrosphere, biosphere is the sum total, this total thing. Hydrosphere is all Earth's water, ice, vapor, rivers, oceans, seas, like lakes, all of that. Atmosphere includes the air that is blanketing around the Earth, right? And the geosphere, which means the Earth's surface, that is the continents, the rocks, the sea floor and everything on the surface of the Earth, right? So all of them, they four are interconnected and they help make our planet special and make our planet be a planet which has life in it. Okay. And because in this biosphere there are two things, two elements which are very important, whether it's lithosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, whatever. There are certain things which are biotic, there are living organisms, and the other are abiotic, and they support each other, and that's how life is able to thrive in. Okay. Alright, so what is biodiversity? We've done this a little while ago, so I'm just recapping, yeah.
The variety of living and non-living organisms and their
Non-living organisms?
living and non-living organisms and their
Okay, yeah.
Variety of animals and plants in a particular area.
Okay, so biodiversity means variety of plants and animals that exist in a specific geographical region, right? So in a region you can have a huge amount of abundance of forest, like Amazon is a great biodiversity hotspot. That means you would find huge amount of different kinds of plants and animals in that place, right? So biodiversity hotspot means where you have huge amount of different kinds of species available, right? So biodiversity is what we are talking about. And why are we talking? Because they are very important. All of them are a part of the web of life. Each one of them have their ecological role. They may be a producer, they may be a consumer, they may be a omnivore, a herbivore, or a decomposer, or a scavenger, right? Every organism has some role to play. Sometimes organisms are dependent on each other. Some of these insects are pollinators, some animals are seed dispersal agents. So all of them are interlinked, and that's why it's important for us to know biodiversity and conserve biodiversity. Okay, so at a smaller level, if I take a small geographical region and I say in that geographical region there are living creatures, like for example there's a forest right in behind your school, right? In that forest there are living things, right? For example there are plants, right? There are grassland, there's a woodland, there are some trees, there are jamun trees, all that, right? There are some antelopes also, you must have seen, some peacocks are there, right? Some worms are there, there are snakes there, right? If you go a little further, there's a lake, Surajpur lake, where there are a lot of other animals. So if you look at this whole area, geographical area, so all of them you can divide them into maybe aquatic if they are pond, lake and rivers, or you can divide it into terrestrial ecosystems. And in every ecosystem, whether it's aquatic or terrestrial, you'd always have producers which will trap sun's energy and convert them into carbohydrates, consumers which will eat on the plants, right? And there would be tertiary consumers, secondary consumers which are eating on herbivores like the tigers and the top carnivores. And then all of these organisms, when they die and when they excrete, they would release materials back into the environment, back into the system through another group of organisms which are called as decomposers, the microbes, which includes the bacteria and the fungi. So this is the abiotic, the biotic part, right? Producers, consumer, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, decomposers, they all are living organisms. So they all are biotic. Now here you can see a list of abiotic factors which are non-living. For example, water, sunlight, soil, rocks, nutrients, pH, temperature, humidity, climate, season, whatever, all these things, they are non-living. But they support certain organisms, right? They allow organisms to survive, and these are non-living or abiotic components. Okay. So coming to the third part, that is conservation of forest and wildlife. So when we have to conserve forest and wildlife, you now know about various things. You know about why are we doing conservation? Why do we need to think about conservation? Right? You also know about deforestation, the loss of habitat. What are the reasons for deforestation? Right? You know about what is biodiversity, what supports biodiversity, and all of these things. So now it's our responsibility to create a. So we need to plan some way by which we can conserve these green areas in our country, elsewhere in the planet. So there are many ways by which we can protect habitats of wildlife, habitats of animals, and that we can do by creating wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, and biosphere reserves. So these are areas which are earmarked, and here you can have regulated things. You can regulate, maybe you do not allow any plantation, cultivation, grazing, felling of trees, hunting, poaching, all could be prohibited. Or maybe in some case, in some of these around the forest you may allow it, but mostly you try to minimize human interference. So when you minimize the human interference, then obviously the habitat is not much disturbed, and it has a chance of surviving in revival and sustainment. They are able to be sustaining in the environment. So conservation of forest and wildlife can be done in three ways: by building up wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, and biosphere reserves. So these are the three strategies that we can have. So we start with first the biosphere reserve. Okay. Now in 1971, UNESCO, you know about United Nations, right? So UNESCO decided that some of these conservational policies were not giving good results, right? And were creating conflicts, because when we are conserving forests, most of these governments, they were trying to make tribals go away from the forest, asking villagers to leave the area. And when you remove people who've been living there for thousands of years, have their heritage and culture coming in the forest, specifically the tribals, there were conflicts all over the world. In forest areas there were conflicts, because one thing is, forest is a resource. So the government is eyeing on that resource, the corporates are eyeing on that resource, and there are poor tribals and villagers also there, which depend on their livelihood. Their day-to-day life, their day-to-day food items, things are dependent on forest. So whenever we conserve and we say, okay, man is not a part of it, man should not interfere at all, and we try to say, okay, tribals, you move out of it, villagers, you move out of that, it creates conflicts that could become a little bit more political also, right? So what was realized in 1970s was that if you want to conserve, because there is a direct link between these areas and humans, we need to create a program which is called Man and Biosphere Program. It's called MAB, Man and Biosphere, right? So it was an intergovernmental, that means बहुत सारी countries के governments, they together, what they did was they tried to aim and establish scientific basis for improvement of relationship between people and their environment. So that environment is also on one hand, and people are also not asked to move out, they are part of that, but they are regulated and they are helped. So there are no conflicts, and we also are able to conserve our main aim, that is to conserve plant and animal life. So we need to make man also as a central part of that whole strategy. It's not just conserving the forest and the wildlife, it's also the man, the tribals and the villagers also a part of that, and how do we manage all of this so that there are no conflicts, right? And this was a major breakthrough. All people agreed to it, and under that, all over the world you can see, I think because of the brightness it's not very clear, but you would find red dots all across this America and South America, in some place in Africa, even in the Middle East, in Europe too many, and in India and Southeast Asia and Russia, everywhere. Everywhere on the planet you have areas which are under the Man and Biosphere program. In these areas, what was set up was called as the Biosphere Reserve. Right? So under the UNESCO's 1971 Intergovernmental Agreement, there was a Man and Biosphere program in which all these countries were asked to build Biosphere Reserve. Right? And this strategy was a different strategy. In this strategy, humans, tribals, villagers, they all are a part of that whole system. They are the part of that system. Okay, and right now, this could be a little outdated, but right now, biosphere reserves currently count around 701 in 124 countries all over the world. Some of these biosphere reserves are between two countries also, because the boundary is in between. So what kind of model a biosphere reserve work on? What is the scientific thing that it has? This is what I wanted to explain. So a biosphere reserve, if you want to look at the model of the biosphere reserve, the structure looks like this. There is a dark area that you see here, the centermost part of the forest. It is abundant with species. There are a lot of endemic species. It's rich in species. It's a niche for organisms, and that is the area that we target, because this is the area where you would find a lot of wildlife and a lot of species. So this area has to be conserved, and that's why in that area, the central core area, no interference of human is allowed. No such activities like felling of trees or grazing or hunting or adventure sports or tourism or any sorts of things can happen. It's absolutely protected area. Only and only after certain permissions, some scientists can go for research work. Except for that, it's absolutely closed for everybody. It's only and only for protection of plants and animals and habitat. Then around the core area is the transition area, which you can see here, a little lighter shade of green. And here you can have some tourism, so you can go for as a tourist. In safaris, you can see the vegetation and the plant and animal life. You can go for education and training. There could be some places where students can be taught, training and workshops can be there to bring awareness about the forest, to bring awareness about conservation. And this education training, you can use it for that. And also for recreational purpose. If people want to go for some recreational activity, they can still go in these areas. And this is the transition area where tribals and humans can also be a part of this whole system. And outside this is a transition area. It's an area which will not have great urban setups, but it will always be around the forest, and it will be also a green area. However, here you can do agroforestry, silviculture, beekeeping for honey production, and all such sorts of things can be done in the transition area. So here you are keeping human aspect, their livelihood, the people who are living there, the villagers, the tribals, also in your conservational strategy. And it's one of the most holistic strategy to conserve biodiversity. Okay. So if you look in India, you'd find so many different types of places where you find biosphere, the Nilgiris and the Nanda Devi. But here in the center, we'll discuss this one as a specific biosphere reserve, and that's the Pachmari Biosphere Reserve. The Pachmari Biosphere Reserve is right in the center of the central state of India, that is Madhya Pradesh. Now, there is something unique about Pachmari, that is that it has vegetation which is of the northern India. You can find similar plants and animals which you may also find in Himalayas. So from Himalayas to plains of India, whatever plants and animals you see, you can still have some relics of that in Pachmari Biosphere Reserve. And also it has some wildlife and plants of the southern India. So it's like in the center, and it has confluence of both the northern India and the southern India, and that makes it quite unique. So Biosphere Reserve is large areas which are protecting land for conservation of biodiversity and also conserving the tribals which are living there. That means you're also conserving the culture of that area. Okay, so now if you look at this map of the Pachmari Biosphere Reserve, you would find that this green area that has been highlighted, that's the green area which is a Biosphere Reserve. And a Biosphere Reserve is the largest conservational body. It may include many national parks or many sanctuaries. So if you see here, this part, you see there's a Tawa reservoir. It's a sort of a lake where there's water. So animals usually come nearby this region for drinking water. And on the southern side, you have the Bori Sanctuary. On the northern side, northeastern side, you have the Pachmari sanctuary, and in between you have the Satpura National Park, which is the first reserve forest of India. And this whole region together is called as Pachmari Biosphere Reserve. Okay, so within this video you saw many plants and animals, and we can use the term flora and fauna to specify things. So flora means the plants which are found in a particular geographical region or an area. So the groups of plants which are found in a specific area would be called as flora. So that includes herbs, shrubs, different species. Together they can be called as flora. And the animals which are found in a particular area are called as fauna. So if I can say, it depends upon the geographical scale. You can take it like for flora of Delhi, that means all the plants which are available in Delhi. Fauna of Delhi, that means all the animals which are available in Delhi. Or maybe it could be, you can say fauna of Pachmari, that means all the animals which are found in the Pachmari Biosphere Reserve. Or flora of Pachmari, that means all the plant life that is found in Pachmari Biosphere Reserve. So if you look at this, some of the picture, you have the wild dogs, the Barasinga, the leopard, the fern, the sal, the mango trees. All of these are the different kinds of species which are found in the Pachmari Biosphere Reserve. So they belong to different flora and also fauna. So the term species, very important. Species is the lowest level of classification. When you try to classify and you want to say, we can say living organism, but what type of organism, then further what family it belongs to, then further what, and if you want to specifically describe an organism, we come down to the level of species. That's a basic one, right? And usually species is a group of population which are very similar, right? When you see specific kind of plants and they're very similar, like gulmohar, if you see different kinds, you can say, okay, you see that thing and you decide, okay, you see that the morphology, you look at it and then you say that this is this organism, right? If it's a cat, you see that outer structure, right? You can see it and visualize it, and then you guess what it is, right? So a species comes from the Latin word kind or appearance. That means how morphologically, that means outer, how does it look like? What is the appearance? And if I want to, it's like literally, if I want to say what is species, it comes from the meaning, this word of species means kind. This kind, that kind, and that is on the basis of appearance. The biological species concept states that species is a group of population. That means it's a group of population, they are similar, whose members have the potential to interbreed. That means the member of that group of population can interbreed, and when they interbreed, they always give a viable, fertile offspring. They would not give an infertile, or they might not be. So sometimes it's absolutely not possible to breed two different species. They are absolutely incompatible. Their egg and the sperm or the pollen are absolutely not incompatible, so you can't breed them. But sometimes if they are very close relatives, you can interbreed them, but they never give a very viable fertile offspring. So they don't belong to two different species. For example, here you can see this is a species of toad and that's a species of frog. Frogs and toads are amphibians, both are close relatives because they're amphibians, right? But they would breed to give rise to a toad. Frog would breed to give rise to an offspring of frog. But if you artificially also try to breed toad and frog, you would never get a fertile offspring. You might get a hybrid which will be completely infertile or will not survive for long, right? So it will have some abnormalities even if you try. So this group is one species and that group is one species, and they do not naturally breed, and that defines what species is. Is it clear? Okay. Then there is a term called endemism or endemic species. Very, very important. Whenever you have to, किसी भी conservational strategy, if I want to build up any conservation strategy, you have to think about endemism, the first important thing. It's very important. Endemic species. Endemic means species which are specifically found in a specific geographical area only. You don't find them naturally anywhere else. There was a penguins in Antarctica, right? They are naturally found there. You may bring them into some enclosure which you create an artificial environment controlled things, but they are not naturally found in that area. They are naturally found only in that geographical region. So endemism means, or endemic species are found only in a specific geographical area. You won't find them anywhere else, right? So dolphins have a specific geographical area, polar bears have a geographical area. Yeah. Okay, I'm just coming on to that. Okay. So biodiversity is sum total of all life form, right? But endemism means that endemic species means that species which are only found here. Biodiversity, if suppose it's a plant which is found here in a tropical area in India, it might be same in Mexico, it might be same in Brazil, you might find the same plant, you might find the same plant in Central Africa, you might find the same plant in Malaysia and Indonesia, you may have some similar looking species everywhere, right? So biodiversity could be specific organisms which are found everywhere, right? So may have include species which are generally found everywhere in that climatic area, that tropical belt or tundra belt or temperate environment, you'd find everywhere. But endemism means that only found there. For example, kangaroos only found naturally in Australia. You don't find kangaroos elsewhere, right? They are not available anywhere else naturally, right? So if I say biodiversity, I include every sort of species: ants, termites, butterflies, plants, trees, shrubs, everything. But if I say endemism, I am talking something really serious. That means these species are naturally found in this area only, right? So endemism could be described on varying geographical scale. You can have endemism only in a specific area within a forest. It could be endemic to that forest. It could be endemic to that country. It could be endemic to that state or endemic to that island. That means you can scale it. Wherever those species are naturally found, it could be endemic to a continent, right? So they are only found, like marsupials, like the kangaroos and the koalas, they are only found in Australia. That means they are endemic to Australia. It's a whole continent which only has these species. No other continent has it. So it's endemic to Australia, right? So that is what we are talking about. Now if a forest has more of endemic species, it becomes our utmost priority to conserve that area, because you won't get that species anywhere else. If I want to conserve this species on this planet, if I want this to be here on this planet, I only have that area to conserve, because that species is not found anywhere else, right? So if a species is generally found everywhere, then that's not a big problem. You still have it on the planet. But endemic species are only found in a specific geographical zone. That makes them very, very important. Okay, so high endemism are in areas which are isolated. Like Australia is isolated. There's all water, it's not connected. So animals and plants they cannot move around. Africa is connected to Asia, is connected to Europe. There could be some movement of animals, but these areas are absolutely isolated. Madagascar, right? Australia, Andaman Nicobar Islands. So they are isolated. They are in fragments, and that's why they have their own ecology, and and that's why they adapt to their own areas, and they would have species which are only found in those regions and not anywhere else, and that makes them more important. Okay, so usually when you study a forest, what you do, you count the species. Suppose this forest has these many thousand species of plants, these many thousand species of animals, insects, worms, birds, whatever. But if you have higher number of endemic species, that means you now are more responsible. You need to conserve that area because of endemic species. So even if you do a species count and if you found very less endemic species, too many species but endemic species are less, then still it would not be in your priority. But if in case it has endemic species, then that forest becomes very important for you to conserve, because you won't find that species anywhere else naturally. Okay. Okay. Alright, so let's go into the endemic species of Pachmani Biosphere Reserve. So there are some species which are endemic to Pachmani Biosphere Reserve. For example, wild mango. Wild mango trees are naturally found there, and sal trees. Sal trees are also naturally found in these regions. So this is endemic to Pachmani Biosphere Reserve. Right? Then there is this giant squirrel, right? You can see it's huge, fluffy tail. It eats on berries and cherries on the trees, and this is only found in Pachmani Biosphere Reserve. Also this bison, right? This bison, it's also a kind of wild buffalo, but this is also with white, the feet are white and the black whole thing. These bisons are also found only specifically in this area of the Satpura National Park and Pachmani Biosphere Reserve. So these are species, some of the fauna which are endemic to Pachmani Biosphere Reserve. And the problem which are faced in all these areas are that their habitats are getting destroyed because of fragmentation and all. There's increasing population of humans which is influencing it, and sometimes there are species which are coming from elsewhere, and they are very aggressive sometimes, or they have no control over their population. There is no population check on them, and they become invasive, right? And then they compete. They're coming from outside, they inhabit this area, and there is no control on them, and they keep on reproducing very fast, and then they are invasive. They also cause damage to native varieties. Okay, that ended the Biosphere Reserve. So now we move on to wildlife sanctuary. So wildlife sanctuaries are smaller areas, right? And here you again are conserving forest, but you try to focus on a specific species. For example, a bird sanctuary, right? Or a sanctuary for maybe conserving the tigers, or a sanctuary to conserve a black buck, or a sanctuary to conserve gharial or rhino, or all these organisms, right? So you can specify, not just for the whole thing, but because you see this is a species found in this area, we need to conserve it. So you can have a smaller pocket of conservational areas which are called as wildlife sanctuaries. And in wildlife sanctuaries, with permission and regulation, in certain pockets of the wildlife sanctuary, you can allow activities like grazing of livestock, collection of medicinal plants, firewood, etc. So people can go in and deal with it, but basically they are for certain specific species which can be conserved. Okay, for example, this is gharial, and that is the black buck, right? And the wildcat, the python, right? The elephants and the rhino. So all of these are different animals that you can, so if you find in a specific small area, green area of forest, you find such species which are so relevant, then you can create that area as a wildlife sanctuary where you will not be that strict, but still it's a protected area. So you would have regulated movement of people for medicinal plants and firewood and all that, but also you are trying to conserve a specific species which are found in that region. Okay, so now in the Indian sanctuaries you'd find very vast landscapes, broad level forests, mountains, sometimes you will have hills and bushlands, grasslands, and sometimes deltas, right? And okay, but even though wildlife sanctuaries are there and protected areas are there, these protected areas are not safe, because villagers sometimes they always think that it's their right to do whatever they want with the forest, and then there's a clash because these people, they keep on encroaching and they become a little more indiscriminate and little difficult to organize, so they keep on causing problem, basically the villagers, not the tribals, but because tribals are living there, they worship the plants and animals, they've developed their culture like that, so they have a lot of information and they're a little bit more peaceful. But usually the villagers who are around and they are heavily dependent on their livelihood, they usually time and again encroach too much sometimes. That's a little bit problem with protected areas also till now. You also can protect animals in zoos, right? The zoological parks, but zoological parks are not their native habitats, right? In this, the animals are kept in enclosures. Sometimes when you write answers, you write cage, right? They're kept in cage. It's a very old term, and nowadays only maybe for birds you can say, but majorly the animals are kept in enclosure, never kept in cage. They are open. There is a trench. There's a small sort of an island where the animals are given a sort of a habitat which is similar to what their natural habitat, but still it's not the natural one. And everything is maintained and regulated by the zoological authority. So it's again, you can conserve some species by keeping them in zoos so that they can be exhibited to the people, and that's also one way, but it's out of their own habitat. It's not conserving in their habitat. Okay. National parks. National parks are bigger than wildlife sanctuaries, and here they have their boundaries. There are forest guards, and this much more regulated, much more like sanctuary was a little bit smaller and allowing things, but national park is a protected area, and it's large, diverse enough to protect whole sets of ecosystem. So you may have a lake, you may have a forest, you may have a mountain, you may have all these different forms of or a river passing by, and you're conserving the whole thing together. There's a river ecosystem, there is a pond ecosystem, there is a forest ecosystem, right? And so all this different ecosystem you're conserving together. So it would be a large diverse area in which you can conserve various forms of ecosystem, and they preserve flora, fauna, landscapes, and sometimes you also have some historic objects like the caves, like maybe monuments also sometimes, like in Ranthambore when you go. There's a very old fort sometimes, and there are some rock shelters there. So you conserve flora, fauna, landscape. Along with that, you also conserve any sorts of historical objects which are available in that area. So you're conserving, it's a little bit more holistic. Wildlife sanctuary was a little bit more oriented towards species along with conserving the forest. But this one is conserving the whole structure of the forest, that means the landscape, the flora, the fauna, and along with that, the historic objects. Okay. So if you look at the Satpura National Park, it's the first reserve forest of India, you will find such caves inside, right? These are rock shelters, and these rock shelters are the only history that we can get, the proof of the history of the ancient history, the medieval history, the ancient prehistoric life. That information you can get only by going and studying these caves, because on these caves they have given us some relics, some idea about how they used to live. If you look at this picture here, you can see some tribal dance, some tribal warfare happening here, some kind of images which are showing animals which are of that forest. There are some elephants here, right? So these pictures are taken right from the Satpura National Park only, so one of the rock shelters. So in this, by looking at this, you can analyze what kind of prehistoric life existed in forest. So we are conserving our biological diversity, we are also conserving the landscape, and we are also conserving anthropological evidences of prehistoric life, right? So this is also very, very important. Okay. Moving on to the next, that is Project Tiger. So when we talk about Pachmadi Biosphere Reserve and the national park, there was a project in 1973 started by the government then, and it was Indira Gandhi's initiative, and it was to protect the tigers. You know, tiger is a keystone species. It is the top carnivore. It has to be there to keep a check on herbivores. And if there will be too many herbivores, there will be too much overgrazing. That will also lead to desertification. So tigers are needed. These are top carnivores. They maintain the whole system. So the tiger population were on decline because tigers were regularly hunted, and poaching used to happen, and then their fur and their bones and these things were smuggled to various places in Southeast Asia, and the tiger count was declining, and that was alarming. And this Project Tiger was launched in 1973, and the objective was to ensure survival and maintenance of tiger population in the country. And for that, various things, technology was put in, right? Pehle, you know, they used to just use the pug mark, count the pug mark and that. But then after this Project Tiger, they started to create something called as Tiger Atlas of India, which tells us how many tigers were, right? And Tiger Habitat Population Evaluation System. There is a system of the data that we have that we can understand and use. Then there is also, you can use mapping, data acquisition, GIS modeling. You can, there are some things by which you can find out where the tigers are moving by radio signals and all of that. So you can use all this, and you can study the DNA of their dung, and from then you can count the tigers in a specific geographical area. And then you got the tiger count. It was very less. It was around 1400 tigers, where 30-40 years ago it was 10-15 times, 20 times more than this number. So the tiger count has been on decline, and it's 1400 left, 1411 or so, and that is why it's very important for us to conserve this very species of the big cats, and that is the tiger. Okay. So, but with Satpura is an excellent example for tiger. Everywhere else in our country, the tiger count has gone down, but in Satpura, it is sustaining. In fact, it's more than, there are more number of tigers than before, right? So, the Satpura Tiger Reserve is unique in the sense that there is a significant increase in the number of tigers being seen there. So, it becomes very more important for us. It should be in the limelight, because everywhere else the tiger count is going down. But this is the forest which is unique in the sense that it has more number of tigers than before. Okay. So you know there are many other national parks in our country. The Corbett National Park, some of you been, that boy has been there, right? You might see something like this in the Jim Corbett. Okay, and then you have the Ranthambore. Some of you have been to Ranthambore also. So this is also one of the 10 popular national parks of India, right? And this is Sariska National Parks. You've got a group of in the Alwar district, deer here, and a lot of herbivore, sambar deers, and all these things are available in this particular belt. Now, before we move on further, we need to understand this particular chart. When we get to know about organisms, we try to classify that organism in categories, so that we know what organism is on the priority, on the risk. We need to find out animals which are at high risk, that they might just go extinct in future. So what we divide is, we make a spectrum of our priority. This is least concern. Something like a dog, cat, everywhere available, not a problem, right? Least concern. So there are species which are of least concern. We're not bothered about them because there are too many, right? Then this one is the NT, not really required for thinking about on conservation line, right? But then here you have three: threatened, critically threatened, endangered, and vulnerable. So these three categories are coming under one bar, and they are called threatened organisms. Organisms which are under threat. That means critically endangered, and vulnerable. So vulnerable kis side hai? Towards the least concern. So vulnerable means that they have high risk of extinction in wild. Matlab in future their population might become very less. Their population might shrink because they're not getting their right habitats. They are not able to maybe they're not able to breed well, whatever may be the problem, but they are at high risk, right? Endangered, that means extreme high risk of becoming extinct in future. So their populations are diminishing to a level that they might face extinction in future. Then comes critically endangered, that is extreme high risk, that you have to completely on high priority, red alert. That means they're critically endangered. We already know that the numbers are so low that it's just about any time that they get extinct. So it's an emergency situation, ICU situation. You have to do something about them now, right? So these are critically endangered. So first, vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. The three categories are coming under the category of threatened organism. High risk, very high risk, and extremely high risk. Then comes on the other side. This is extinct in wild. that means we are not sure whether the species have extinct or we still have some organism left. They are somewhere in the wild, so we are not sure whether they have already extinct or they are still there. So that's one thing. Then comes extinct, you know, the dodo, the dinosaurs, right? They are not available anymore. They've all gone extinct. You can see some of the pictures here. So you have the dinosaurs, you have the saber-toothed cat, the woolly mammoths, right? Right, in Siberia, passenger pigeon, Tasmanian tiger, golden toad, right? So this sloth. So all of these organisms are not available now anymore. By magic or whatever you do, you can't bring these species back to our planet. They have disappeared, they have gone. So you won't be having them back, and these animals are extinct now. Then comes endangered species. These are species which are, with respect to Satpura National Park, Barasingha. Their levels are now so low that they might face extinction in future. Black buck, right? It's again, their numbers are very low. And tigers, you know, there are maybe very few. Sometimes we think that, okay, snakes and frogs and lizards and bats and owls, they are not really important. And we say, okay, it's okay to kill them or whatever. But it's not like that. Even small ant, a butterfly, they might be pollinators specific to a plant. Without them, the plant cannot reproduce, right? So these insects, these snakes, they have an important part in the food web, right? And that's why we need to conserve. We should not ignore them because they are least concern or there are too many. It's not that we should ignore them. They are also part of our conservation in our conservation strategy because they are the part of the food web. Because see, what we are conserving is an endangered species, but that endangered species might be eating them. So if they don't get this, they might not. So it's important for us to conserve them also. So food web, you know, there are different food chains and they can be interlinked, and that's why everybody is dependent on everyone, and that makes the food web. So now when we know that species are critically endangered, extinct in wild, extremely endangered, we need to have a record of all that so that we are highlighted and we are aware what we have to do. That's why this red data book is continuously gets updated. It's a source book which keeps a record of all the plants and animals which are endangered. It's maintained by international organization. You may have red data books which are published by governments, like for example this one is a red data book of Republic of Bulgaria. It's on the animals of Bulgaria, right? This is red data book on threatened birds of Asia. This is red data book on invertebrates in Britain, right? This is red data book of butterflies of India. So you can have a specific small book on a specific group of organisms, but what is the red data book? It is a book which has record of all endangered species. Okay. Coming to the next, this picture is of the picture of the Tawa Reservoir. You see, we not only have to conserve the species which are resident. There are many species which come, stay for a few months, go back. We have to conserve it for them as well. Because they fly from so long, they are our guests, and we need to conserve. They come here only for finding those habitat, so that they can lay eggs, so that they can escape the harsh conditions of their own place. So they migrate. So there are many birds basically, because birds are the ones which can fly and travel long distance. You know that they have two wings and they have two legs. So 9,000 kinds of birds of the world of different colors and size, and they store, eat different kinds of food, and they migrate. They move from one place to the other, right? Why do they move? That's one question. You can see here that seasons change. For example, if you talk about Russia, Siberia, right? So in Siberia, average temperature in January is like negative 25, 30. At that time we have winters also, but our temperature is about 10 degree, 12 degree, sometimes 10 to 15 degree. That's January temperature, average January temperatures in India. 10, 15, right? January, February. But if you talk about Siberia, it's in negative 25, negative 30. In that cold, you can't find food. You can't lay eggs, you can't breed, you can't, right? So it's very, very harsh. So in their summers are like our winters. Their summers are like 20 degree, 15 to 20 degree, which are like our winters. So they fly from the Siberia, from Iran, from all these places to our country, and to find food, to escape the harmful environment and to lay eggs and breed. So they are dependent on these ecological niches. They are dependent on these lakes, forest areas which are there in our country, and if they don't find it, then they would that's a big problem. They might also face problems in future. So we don't need to just focus on the resident species. We also have to take care of the migrants, the ones who are coming here for resources. Okay, so migratory birds fly from faraway areas every year due to climatic changes. They lay eggs because in their place, natural habitat becomes very cold and inhospitable, and so such birds which migrate from these places to far off distances, right, they are called as migratory birds. So they come in during, maybe start to come in November, and they stay here in December, January, February, and March they pack their bags and go back to Russia, Siberia, right, and they stay there for March, April, May, June, July, August, September, and then they again move back to India. So these are migratory birds who travel in order to, okay. The next part is recycling of paper. You know that we talked about deforestation. How are we linked to this? Students, and we use a lot of papers. All of this paper are coming from cutting down trees. So trees are direct link, our link to forests. We are consuming trees, and that's making the deforestation. So it takes about 17 full-grown trees to make 1 ton of paper, and you know that each paper can be recycled to at least 5 to 7 times, and if we save paper every day, we will save many trees in a year, right? So each one of us can contribute to, in our way, in a small little way. If we conserve paper, we conserve trees indirectly, but that will happen. So that's you should do, and also is important. Not only that, when paper industry uses chlorine, right, there are certain chemicals which are used for bleaching of the pulp and all of that chemicals. These chemicals are made to move into the water bodies and cause pollution. So if we use less paper, we will also cause less paper manufacturing, and that would have lesser impact on environment because there will be less amount of chemicals which will be diffusing into the water bodies. Okay, there's a small pictures that I have about how to recycle paper. You have to need this mesh sort of a thing, screen, right, and you have to have some papers, you have to cut them, put some food color, right, so you have to create a pulp sort of a thing. Then you have to use a blender, put the paper, you have to soak it in water, and after that it becomes a little mulchy and pulpy. You take them down into this grinder, blend it. You can add some flower petals, some seeds or some struck things into it, and grind it, and you get a very fine pulp. You put it in the water on a tray, then you put this wire gauze screen onto it, and you take the paper pulp onto it, and finally you have to just take it out, dry it with a cloth so that it absorbs water, and then you can dry it with a hair dryer, and the paper is ready. So you can create things out of these things at home also. But anyhow, this is a very home-based way of reusing recycling paper, but recycling papers can be done in a very professional way also, and we should also try to buy such products. Then again, what else can we do? We can do afforestation, planting trees. You've done it in this season. In the monsoon season is a good season for planting trees. So whenever we need to restock, we can't just keep on cutting. Our stocks are depleting. We need to add more trees. The trees need to grow up. It takes a long time for them to grow up. So that's what we have to do. We have to restock our forest areas with trees wherever we need to find, wherever the patches have gone a little bit off green. We need to grow trees on these areas. We need to have afforestation. We need to do reforestation. Even if we leave the forest without cutting trees anymore, the forest might regrow in a long time, but it might replenish itself. That's one strategy. But also we can plant new trees. But while planting the trees, we should make sure that we're planting trees found in that local area. You should not get trees which are from anywhere else because they might become invasive. Okay, in India, we're coming on to the end of the chapter. In India, we have many laws which protect plants and animals from getting exploited. Right? So there is a Forest Act, very old, 1927. Then there was a Conservation Act in 1980 and Forest Conservation Law in 1981, which prohibits people, companies and people to over-exploit our forest resources. Then protection of wildlife. There are a lot of laws regarding taxidermy. When you make those animals, you hunt and you stuff the animals, you create those mounts. There are laws for that. You cannot smuggle animals, you cannot kill animals which are endangered, right? There are fines and laws which are there. So there is a wildlife protection rules. There have been a lot of amendments to all these laws, right? And what is the purpose of these laws? The purpose of these laws is to protect the forest from getting exploited by humans. Okay. Right. So finally, if I want to sum it up, the Forest Conservation Act, this act is aimed at preservation and conservation of natural forest, right? And meeting the basic needs of people living nearby, the biosphere reserve strategy. Okay. So to summarize all of it, what you learned today was, first thing, that deforestation. What are the natural causes? What are the man-made causes of deforestation? Right. We discussed about the various how deforestation, consequences of deforestation, how it causes deserts, desertification, how it causes floods, how it causes droughts, how is it related to global warming and climate change. We discussed about the various aspects of conservation, like the biosphere reserve, the wildlife sanctuary and the national park. We specifically studied about the Pachmani Biosphere Reserve, having a closer look at how Satpura National Park and the Pachmani Wildlife Sanctuary looks like. And we discussed about the migratory birds, the recycling of paper, endangered species and red data book, and also what we can do to conserve forests and conserve plants and animals and wildlife. Thank you very much.